Hi, Misha here. And to have, I would say a new model, but it's actually kind of a reintroduction of an older model from Hobby Master. They did several of these in the past, haven't done them for a number of years, and then they've come out with two versions. This is the Douglas Skyraider. This is the U.S. Air Force so-called Sandy version used in Vietnam. Another version that Hobby Master just released is the French A-1 as used in Algeria. And this plane has a very interesting history. And really just very impressive. It has had many names and many more nicknames over the years, but from its outset, it was pretty much one dedicated role. This was an attack plane. From the outset, through its entire service. And it dates back to World War II. In 1942, Ed Hyman at Douglas Aircraft was leading a project to develop a new dive and or torpedo bomber known as the BTD-1, or the prototype would have been XBTD. It was basically to replace the TFB Avenger and SB-2C Hell Diver. But technology of the war progressed very rapidly, and by 1944, the BTD, which Douglas had received funding to develop, was just becoming outdated and pointless. So, in June of that year, officials from the company approached the military and essentially got permission to scrap the existing project and then to roll over the money they'd already received into a new project, which the government agreed to, but the new project had a very, very demanding deadline of 9 months. Well, the very, very first sketches for what would become the XBT-2D, originally to be named the Destroyer 2, were made within a day, and kind of the template was ready to go and shown off by August of 44, and the first prototype was rolled out in February of 45, and it first flew in March of 45 and entered into U.S. Navy testing in April of 45. Test pilots and Navy officials alike were very impressed. It was an easy handling plane, and it could serve as both a dive bomber and torpedo bomber. However, of course, the war in Europe was over, and the war in the Pacific was winding down. Nevertheless, the Navy did place an initial order for 548 planes. And what we have, it was renamed from BT-2D to AD-1 for Attack Douglas. And it was a single engine, single seat plane, which was kind of a new concept for a dive or torpedo bomber. It was decided that the bomb aimer, bombardier, was really useless on a small bomber like this. And likewise, any kind of movable mount, machine gun or cannon, along with its gunner, were just pretty much wasted because they weren't able to keep up and defend the plane against the fast propellers and the approaching jets of the day. It was seen that basically speed or escort was the only way to defend such a plane. So with that in mind, they focused on just making the thing carry a lot of ordnance. It has a total of 15 external hardpoints, 7 under each wing, plus 1 under the fuselage. Early versions would have had 6 guns. Later they would kind of standardize on 4 20mm cannon. As you see, it is a propeller. It's not a jet. So it was kind of tried and tested technology. The plane itself has a large fuselage where most of the fuel was stored. The cockpit had armor. It does not have any kind of internal bomb bay. This was not used both to save on weight and complexity, and also to allow the plane to be more flexible and able to mount future ordnance. It is about 39 feet long with a 50-foot wingspan. It's not going to win any races. It's only capable of about 320 miles per hour max speed with a cruise speed of around 200 miles per hour. And it's capable of a max altitude of about 28,000 feet. This was developed for the Navy as a carrier-based aircraft. It was also soon ordered by the Marine Corps. Well, the war ended, of course, and many projects were just cut entirely. But for whatever reason, it was just so favorably looked upon, the initial order was just scaled back to a total of 25 planes, 3 of which were delivered in 1945. The remaining 22 were delivered in 1946, and these started to enter squadron service late that year. The A-1 Skyraider was liked enough that the order was increased again to about 240 additional planes, and so on and so forth. The 82 and 83 would just be improved versions, mostly with better, more powerful engines. Also, they would fix a few structural weak points because this plane was made to be as light as possible, so they did find some places where they maybe took a little too much off, so they fixed that. 1949, with all the new jets coming in, some kind of questioned how much of a future the Douglas Skyraider might have, but then 1950, the Korean War rolls around, and by July of that year, it's seeing combat very early on and proving itself very capable. The Navy would use it as a strike aircraft, attack plane. The Marines would use it as a close air support for troops on the ground. The only torpedo bomb raid of the war would be conducted by Skyraiders in May of 1951, in which they attacked, partially destroyed, a North Korean dam. This was not a fighter plane or a dogfighter. However, it did achieve one air-to-air victory in that war. And generally speaking, had a very good combat record. It could carry a load of ordnance. It could carry napalms. Newer versions like the 84 could also mount rockets and had more modern radar equipment, as well as navigational aids and a more up-to-date cockpit. In that war, about 128 would be lost in combat, but production would continue afterwards, with the final Skyraiders being the 86 and 87 variants leaving the factory in February of 1957 with just under 3,200 ultimately made. So quite a large number for a post-war propeller aircraft. Again, its future was perhaps a little in question. I mean, jets were firmly established by 1957, even getting into the second generation. 1962, though, these were still very much in Navy and Marine service. That's when the name AD was changed to A-1. This model here is an A-1H, which was formerly the AD-6. There would also be the A-1E two-seater, formerly known as the AD-5. Still very much in service when Vietnam kicked off, and that's really where they become famous. These were used in 1964 during Navy strikes against North Vietnam. They were also used for counterinsurgency. By this time, the U.S. Air Force was taking some surplus A-1Es out of mothballs. The Marines were still operating them as well. In 1965 and 1966, each year, a Skyraider would shoot down one MiG-17, making it one of the few propeller-driven planes to shoot down a jet fighter. Pretty interesting. And they would continue on and on and on. By 1967, the A-1E two-seaters that the Air Force had been using were wearing out, so they switched over to using only A-1Hs. And then in 1968, the Navy would fly its final mission with the Skyraider and then retire it from active service, the Marines following suit. The Air Force would continue to use these, though. While they did use them earlier in the war as a counterinsurgency, by this point they were being used as essentially helicopter escorts, with the Raider known as a Sandy, call sign Sandy, and these were used to rescue downed pilots. The Raider had a few roles. It would come in and use its cannon as suppressing fire. It would also drop napalm or hit the jungle with rockets to protect the pilot. They would also fly around to draw out enemy fire, so machine gun nests and whatnot could be pinpointed and done away with to protect the helicopters actually flying in to do the rescuing. So it was a very risky job, but it's credited with saving the lives of over 3,800 servicemen. So probably a very worthy job. Other nicknames that the plane had kind of accumulated over time were Able Dog for AD. That's more of a Korean War designation. They were also known as hobos because of the H in A-1H. And probably most famously, these were known as Spads, which is a bit of a mixed reputation name because it was such a slow propeller plane in the age of second and even third generation jets. But that was also part of its charm. Even though it was slow, it was very maneuverable. And it also was very stable. They could launch a lot of its ordnance or shoot its cannon and be very pinpoint accurate. It also had very good loiter time. They could really hang over a target a lot longer than a jet of the day. And it could take up to 10-hour missions. It could carry a payload of 8,000 pounds or more. Some sources claim up to 14,000. Like I said, it has 15 hard points under the wings, and it could pretty much carry everything in U.S. Navy and U.S. Air Force inventory. There's even a specialized version capable of carrying and dropping nuclear weapons. But in Vietnam, they mostly carried napalm, rockets, other types of bombs. The cannon themselves each had 200 rounds, meaning there were 800 cannon shells on board. Not bad at all. And the armor was actually increased with later versions because of the fact that these were used so close to the ground and were such a tempting target, being relatively low flying and very slow flying. So to keep the pilots as safe as possible, they were well armored, and that was good because many of these returned home safely, but with many holes in them. They were said to be easy to fly, and pilots, generally speaking, liked them a great deal. That said, by 1968, these were being pretty much out of service throughout the U.S. military. They were replaced by Douglas's own A-4, as well as the A-6 Intruder, and the LTD Vought A-7. So, 4 different jets ended up replacing the good old SPAD. So by the late 60s, more or less these were all out of active U.S. service. The ones still in Southeast Asia were transferred to the South Vietnamese Air Force by 1972. And the South Vietnamese had been using the A-1 since 1960. So they were actually very familiar with the plane and had thousands upon thousands of hours on it, and were well respected for being very capable Skyraider pilots. It would start to be replaced by the South Vietnamese Air Force by 1967 by the Northrop F-5 jet. However, many would still remain in active use until the end of the war in 1975. France would have about 100 that they would use in Algeria, as I said, and Britain would acquire about 50 of these around 1951. They would deploy them in the Suez Crisis, and then they would retire theirs in 1962, and of those, about a dozen would be transferred to the Swedish Air Force. So what's that, third hand at this point? Where they would continue to serve until 1976. So a very impressive lifespan for a plane that, by all rights, probably should have not made it out of World War II, but it was so capable and filled such an important niche that there just, weren't planes to really replace it until it just had to be a jet. But I mean, this thing carries so much ordnance and was so dependable. It's really, true successor did not come until the A-10 Warthog. So kind of the last and the first, but just a neat plane, and I'm really happy Hobbymaster has done new models of this. As far as the model itself, after I rambled about the history, it's your typical Hobbymaster, pretty much all metal, very heavy plane, removable canopy with removable pilot. The propeller does spin, and spins very smoothly and evenly. I like that. It comes with a bunch of ordnance for the wings that plug in easily but very tightly. I haven't had trouble with these falling off. I've noticed with the 2019 Hobbymaster they've gotten really good with their ordnance. It does have a centerline drop tank you can use, but when it's on the stand it won't fit, so if you want to use the drop tank you'll have to put the wheels in deployed. One thing I didn't mention, This is a tail dragger, meaning it has two wheels in the front that fold back, and then it has a small wheel in the back. This was the last so-called tail dragger plane in the U.S. Marines and U.S. Navy. Very anachronistic, because even late World War II, a lot of new designs were going to the so-called tricycle undercarriage, but they went with the tail dragger to save on weight, and just because a tricycle wasn't necessary, so they didn't use it. Same kind of thing with the internal bomb bay. I just think that's fun that there's a tail dragger that was used heavily in Vietnam. But anyway, your typical Hobbymaster model. Very big for a propeller plane. It's really the biggest. I mean, like I said, the wingspan is 50 feet, which is more than a lot of jets. But this will fit into any Vietnam collection. And I don't have the French 84 version, but I've heard good things about it. But, you know, if you're only going to have one, it's just hard to pass up the classic U.S. Air Force sandy paint scheme version. And no, this doesn't have the toilet bomb, although in the past, Hobbymaster did do a toilet bomb version. And by that I mean in October of 1965, they mounted a toilet under a Skyraider and dropped it on North Vietnam because, reasons? I guess they didn't want to clean the toilet. That's one way to get rid of it, right? Maybe they'll reintroduce the toilet bomb version later on if these are successful. But yeah, I've done videos on the A4, A5, A6, A7. So, had to do the A1 when it became available. Well, if you have any questions or comments, please do post them below. And if you're interested in a model like this one I acquired from Pete's Collectibles. Actually, I've had it on pre-order for a number of months because these were supposed to be out, I think, in May or June, and Hobbymaster being Hobbymaster, they came out in September, but better late and of good quality than never. I appreciate you tuning in. This is Misha. I'll catch you very soon next time.